What are the mechanics of brain injuries and how are they classified? I'm Joe Lamb, and this is Joe Knows Brains. Today, we're going to talk about the mechanics of how brain injuries actually occur with a discussion about open and closed brain injuries and direct versus indirect impacts and a couple of the other ways that brain injuries can occur and kind of the classifications related to those. These are important because knowing and identifying the type of brain injury you have can help you understand and better treat yourself after brain injuries. You know, each one has a different level of severity and a different level of treatment that you can use afterwards. For example, while most brain injuries, you might want to have additional sleep. It's very well known that any kind of brain injury involving brain bleed, as I talked about in my last video, the last thing you want to do is be asleep after an injury like that. So that's why it's always so important after any kind of severe traumatic brain injury to go get yourself treated by a medical professional. The first distinction within mechanics of brain injury is going to be an open versus a closed head injury. In open head injuries, this occurs when something like a foreign object, it penetrates the skull itself. These can be actually broken down even further into penetrating, perforating, and tangential injuries. These types of injuries account for about 25% of TBIs. Penetrating occurs, and it sounds about like it sounds. It's when an object penetrates in and remains in the brain. Bullets are a very common example of this. If it remains lodged in the brain, that's penetrating. Perforating occurs if the bullet were to come all the way through the head, leaving an entry and an exit wound. I'm very sorry that this is such a morbid topic, but it's the easiest way to explain the differences. And then tangential injuries occur if an object were to, this time we'll lower it a little bit and say a baseball. Tangential injuries if a baseball were to hit the head and were to crack the skull and cause an injury in that form. And then this causes the actual skull fragments themselves to go into the brain. So penetrating goes in and gets lodged, perforating goes all the way through, and tangential cracks the skull, and then the skull is what actually does it. Man, this one's fun. Closed head injuries, these are 75% of all head injuries. These are the most common form of head injuries and what we often talk about when we refer to concussions and other TBIs. It's just no penetration, but you've suffered a brain injury without any type of internal penetration or perforation, which is still penetration, just keeps going. You know, the two most common versions of closed head injuries are going to be, the two largest categories of these are direct and indirect. Direct being what most people consider a blunt force, and indirect being what I'll talk about as coup contra coup injuries or an acceleration deceleration injury. A direct blow to the head and a closed head injury, a direct closed head injury. These are probably the most straightforward closed head injuries that there are. If you take a punch from Mike Tyson, this is the type of head injury you're going to have. Well, I guess you can have a full tangential one if your skull cracks, but as long as the skull remains in and you get that strong punch from Tyson, you're going to get what's known as a direct closed head injury. And it's pretty straightforward. It's the same thing as most people think of. If I punch you on the arm and you have a bruise, hey, thank you. And you have a bruise, you're gonna be injured. It's a very common classic injury. But the other side is if thank you. If I was to shake my hand's not going to be real messed up. So this is the second type of injury. This is an indirect impact. And this occurs when you've got the actual brain hitting the inside of the skull itself. I've kind of alluded to this in the prior videos, but really specifically what it is if I was to, I won't do it because I'm not going to cause a brain injury on a video about them, but if I was to slam my head forward really quickly and then backwards, that brain, that pickle in the jar, is going to hit the front of the brain, and then when I whip it back, it's going to hit the back. That's commonly called what's known as a coup contra coup injury. And the coup is the first injury, and the contra coup is the second. So when the head goes forward and the brain hits the front of the skull, that's the coup. And then when it falls back and it hits the back of the skull, that's the contra coup. So necessarily, and this is most commonly seen in car accidents because it's a whiplash style injury. It almost always presents, in fact, by definition, it has to present with an injury to both the front and the back of the brain. Well, actually, it doesn't have to be the front and the back, but just two sides, one motion and then another motion. And that's what causes these types of injuries. And then just one last type of brain injury I wanted to talk about, because you can have an indirect brain injury through a separate through a different cause, essentially, and that's hypoxia. And that essentially just means loss of oxygen to the brain. Some common ways that this occurs are strokes, carbon monoxide poisoning, and excessive smoke inhalation. This can cause the failure of oxygen to get to the brain tissues, and it's just as much a brain injury as the others. But as you can see, very different in terms of the mechanics of how it occurs, in that there's no physical motion, there's no direct injury, there's no skull fragments, a lot quieter and less gruesome, but equally as dangerous because strokes and carbon monoxide poison, smoke inhalation kill thousands of people. Strokes are one of the leading causes of deaths in people over the age of 65, outside of generally considered, old age. So all of this is to say that brain injuries can occur in a variety of ways. And in all of these different ways, it's important to have an understanding of these, so that way you can better reflect what's happened and understand if one of these were to occur somewhere where you're nearby, you'd have a better understanding of what needs to be done afterwards. As always, all of this information can be found in our book, The Layman's Guide to Brain Injuries, which is here on the page with me. And you'll see a link below, and I think it's also in the comments. So if any of you guys have any trouble finding it, just leave a comment and tell them I did a bad job here at the end explaining that. So thanks, everybody. Look forward to next time. This is Joe Lamb with Joe Knows Brains. Thank you.